You're listening to the Academy Podcast, presenting an innovative curriculum for personal growth. Sit in on exclusive conversations with influential people as they share the secrets that made them the front runners in their industries. Now here are your hosts, Austin and Kagia.
I'm G.
And I'm Austin.
Welcome to the Academy Podcast, where we have special guests all the way in from, where you live now, Doc?
Still in Atlanta.
All the way from Atlanta.
Yep.
We have Dr. Fredrick Russell, who is currently the principal of the True North Leadership Group.
That's right. That's right.
Thrilled to have him.
Pastor Russell wears many hats, but I gotta just put out there that he's my mentor. I spent 3.5 years under his leadership. So Pastor Russell, man, we're delighted to have you. Thank you for being on with us today.
It's an honor to be with both of you guys this morning. And it's a glorious day.
Yeah.
Even though we're still in prison here.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're thankful and grateful. You know, Pastor Russell, as we said before, you wear so many different hats, and we're going to get into a lot of those things. We're excited about the leadership and the things that you're doing. But for those of us who are listening who don't know who you are or have little information, we want to kind of get into your start first. How did you get into the ministry? What happened after you left college? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I started at 21 years old, 4 years out of high school. I started in the Allegheny West Conference, and I was to be in a little church in Virginia, but I went down to work with my supposed predecessor in an evangelistic meeting. The Lord blessed it so mightily that they wanted to leave the pastor there. So as opposed to starting in my own church out in the Hitherlands, I started in Cleveland, Ohio, right there in the city. And the Lord bless in 2 churches, one in Cleveland, one outside of Cleveland, in Oberlin, Ohio. And again, Oberlin is known for the college there, because Oberlin College is the first college above the Mason-Dixon line that accepted blacks, and it is and it had a seminary there that some of the greatest preachers in the world went to when they had their seminary years ago. Back in the turn of the 20th century is when that seminary was operating up until around the 60s and 70s.
So now, how long were you in that district?
5.5 years.
Oh, wow. Wow.
That's good for a first district.
Yeah.
So you all started with an evangelistic meeting, and then you were left there as the senior.
No. The church I was supposed to go to originally was a 3-church district, let me say, in Virginia.
Okay.
They did an evangelistic meeting that summer. I was to take over from the pastor who was there. It went so well, they decided to leave the pastor there.
Wow.
And then put me in the city. And I just want to say on the backside, praise God.
Yeah.
Isn't it funny how,
you know.
Yeah, we think we know what we want.
Yeah.
We do, but I'm glad God's in charge.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Doc, so talk to us about some of the things that you learned in your district that you've kind of carried over and is still with you today. What are some of those things?
Well, I came into ministry with a passion to try to do it at the highest levels. But I did learn some things early on. First of all, I think I came in with a full sense of how I was going to do it, but I met reality early on. I started in the little church first in Oberlin, Ohio, knowing that I would take over the church in Cleveland in about 3 months. So when I got in there, I was not married. I was given all I got. I had 3 prayer meetings on Wednesday night, one for kids from from the 4th grade up until around the 8th grade, and then a second prayer meeting, a second hour from 6 to 7 for the 9th to 12th grade, and then a prayer meeting for everybody else. I kept office hours from the beginning, and I was just really giving it all I had. But when I got to the second church, I had to pull back a little bit on that first church, and of course, I was still trying to give it all, but I had to accept the reality is that you got to spread this stuff around. So what I learned in that first district, in both churches, I kept office hours from the beginning.
Yeah.
I had a place to go to be structured. I tried to, my mentors early on in ministry was teaching me the value of writing it down, organize it. That was Delbert Baker was my first mentor. A guy named S.T. Lewis, who is retired now, was there. But the whole people part of it was super important to me, in that I learned that leadership early on is 10% technical and 90% how you relate to people. Right. And of course, that's a no-brainer when it comes to ministry. But I was around some pastors who really didn't like people. And I began, even early on, I was saying, how did you get here? Because it's all about people. And in ministry early on, that became just a forte that God blessed it. And consequently, he blessed the ministry because the people were clearly the center, not just the technicality of the stuff you can do on the side as well.
Right.
Okay, question real quick about your office hours. What is the importance of office hours, and have you utilized that from the beginning all the way through? Is every district a district where office hours are important to you?
Well, let me start at the end of it. Every place I have gone, except the last church I was in, I started office hours. In the same hours, 9 to 1, Monday through Wednesday.
Yep.
And the importance of it was that if my people have to get up and go to work, I need to get up and go to work as well. Plus, I wanted the church to have a central hub during the day, where if they need to call in or come by, they can do it. Now, it was comical at times because in the Cleveland church, we eventually bought an old Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses, so I had a secretary everywhere I went. So my first secretary got paid little, nothing, but we had a little small office. We both sat in the same room together. We had one phone. So when people would call in, she would answer the phone and she would say, you want to speak to the pastor? Could you hold 1 second? She pushed the mute button and passed the phone over to me. I was right beside her. But hey, but it worked. It worked. And so by keeping those office hours, people got very serious about their church. Folk eventually began to come. Because when people know where to find you, they don't bug you. But if they got to search you down and find you, and they think you ain't working, then they will hound you to death. But because they knew I was available and accessible, it was amazing as to what it did for the ministry and for trusting me that I was on my job.
Hey, G, I just want to say that, after I left Berean under Pastor Russell, I had those office hours of 9 to 1 o'clock in me. And so when I got here to Murfreesboro in Washington, I started office hours from 9 to 1. But at Berean, there was always people that were coming into the office. I had tons of meetings, but nobody came to see me, man, in my office hours. I plastered it, I posted it, but people still called hours of the day. But that was still something that was in me. And so, Pastor Russell, I think that as you kind of trekked and had that sense early in your ministry, the leadership, the knack that you had for that, going into Miracle. Let's talk a little bit about Miracle. A lot of people know you from your time at Miracle. Talk about that and talk about how your leadership began to develop there and growing that church.
Well, it's how I got there.
Right.
Alvin Kibble, who was the president of Allegheny East then, I was coming from Allegheny West. I had sat on the Pine Forge board for a number of years, and Elder Kibble got to know me. He first offered me Church of the Oranges up in North Jersey, where my friend Earl Sarlet is right now. And Brenda and I my wife Brenda and I flew over one weekend just to fill it out, to see it. And we had to turn it down because the cost of living in North Jersey was so high that if we had taken that church, we'd have been bankrupt in a week. We couldn't afford that. Well, a little time later, Elder Kibble offered me Miracle Temple. My problem with Miracle Temple was I learned never accept the church sight unseen. And so when I got to Miracle Temple on that first Sabbath, we were experiencing the worst snowstorm in the last decades on the East Coast in the Baltimore, Washington metro area. We get there on that Sabbath, and when I turn on the street where the church is on Fulton Avenue, it was like a battle zone. It was nothing but row houses, and all of them were boarded up, and the graffiti artists had done their job. They were all boarded up with graffiti. It was unlike anything I ever seen. There was no parking lot. I was coming from the Midwest, where there was always a parking lot. I didn't realize in most northern churches at that time, They just simply had no parking lots. We found with our little Toyota Previa and our two little small kids, a snowdrift that we parked beside, and then we slid down to the front of the church and walking. In front of the church was about 3 deacons who were out trying to shovel the walks, and we spoke to them. They figured out I was a new parson in town, and we opened the door and we walked into something that was so depressing. We walked into a little tiny lobby. There was wrinkled up, dirty red carpet, and the doors closed. It was a dark, dank environment. Across the front of the fellowship hall was one of those dot matrix printed signs, and it says, with the edges still on the side of it, "Welcome, Pastor Russell and family." They said, "Pastor, you want us to give you the tour?" I said, "Yeah." The tour took about 4 minutes. We walked into the fellowship hall, which is on the first floor. They took us back to the children's classroom. The first classroom was the kitchen. The second classroom was in the boiler in the heating room. Then they took us upstairs to the second floor sanctuary, which said about 250 on a good day. And I could not believe what I was seeing. I began to get progressively depressed over that day because I had come from the third largest church in the conference. And I got there in about 27, 28 years old. And so I had moved rapidly in ministry. My first full year in ministry, I was the third highest baptizer in the conference. And so I had to start to get a rep that I was moving fast. I walked into this, I said, "What is Alvin Kibble thinking about?" Well, on that Sabbath morning, we started service because of snowing. Only about 35, 40 folk are in the sanctuary. Elder Kibble does not show up to introduce me.
Oh.
I am livid at this point because what am I going to say when I've been introduced? The service was super depressing. We had an organist there, a young boy named George. George was not Adventist, but they had hired him. George was 17 years old. George could not play worth a dime. And so every song that George played sounded like the last song that George played. And by the time I got up, I was so depressed. I looked at the back of the church, which wasn't far, and it was my wife, and I had 2 small kids sitting on either side. And they had this, G and Austin, this deer in the headlight look that says, "Daddy, what did you do?" And so I managed to introduce myself. I preached about 20 minutes. It was depressing. That evening, all of the pastors from around the city came in for the installation. Snow had stopped. Elder Kibble made it down from Pine Forge to Baltimore. And Elder Kibble is standing beside me, and he is saying, "Freddie, I've always believed that this could be one of the better churches in Baltimore." And I'm just wanting to cuss him out at that point. In fact, I am cussing him out in my mind at that juncture. Because I needed a paycheck, I decided it would be wise not to say it out loud. And all the pastors came in, and this is true. They all shook my hand like, welcome to Baltimore, with a smirk on their faces like, "So you're the sucker that took Miracle Temple Church." And I was just upset. I managed to get through the installation. That night, we went back to our hotel room. We get to the hotel room. Brenda puts the kids to sleep, and I begin to cry, literally. And she begins to pray. And I said, "I cannot do this, God. This is not what I signed up for." After 3 or 4 days, we were out there looking for housing for 3 or 4 days. Brenda and the kids drove back to Dayton, Ohio, where I was. We were serving. I stayed in Baltimore with a rental car in order to continue to look for housing because the time of our departure from Ohio was imminent. So for the first time, about Thursday, I went into, after that installation on Sabbath, I went into the office. Office, put it in quote marks. It was in a row house on the side of the church because the crown jewel of housing stock in Baltimore is the row houses. I walk into that cold row house. They had radiator heat. That meant when you put the heat on, it's going to take about 2 days worth of work. Wow. My office was on the second floor. I walked into that office. They had huge windows that were filthy. There were no window treatments, no curtains, no blinds, no nothing. I looked at the desk. The desk had roach droppings on top of the desk. I pulled the drawers out. there was rat droppings inside of the drawer itself. And I just said, I can't believe this. I was mad, I was upset, and I said out loud, by myself in the office, I said, all I'm gonna do is preach a few sermons here. In a year or two, I'm out of here. I'm not gonna invest myself in this. This is not me. My pride was all over the place. And I looked out the window down on the first floor to the outside, and the snow had begun to melt, and there was garbage everywhere. And I remember that phrase in Nehemiah that says, and Nehemiah saw, and the people saw the rubbish, and they were discouraged. I saw the rubbish, and I was discouraged, and I said, never would I do this. And at that very moment, for the first time in my life, I heard God speak. There was no Eli for me to go to and say, is this God? I knew it was God.
Yeah.
And God said something to me that I knew was his voice. It says, no, you will not. And I ended up praying a prayer that I had never prayed before. I don't know where the prayer came from. There was no predisposition to pray it. But the prayer I prayed right there with God, with tears streaming down my face, because my pride was all over the place. And sometimes God has got to take you down in order to bring you back up.
Yeah.
And for me and my pride, he needed to take me down. And I prayed this prayer. I said, God, if you give me a vision for the place, I would give it all that I got. And little did I know what was about to happen. Over the first 3 or 4 years, God began to bless we were in the poor section of Baltimore. There were drug dealers everywhere. It was a very demographically diverse environment. It was poor whites, poor Asians, poor Latinos, and poor blacks, all living in the same identical space. But in those first 4 or 5 years, God began to grow that church. We had some students from Johns Hopkins University, black and white, that began to come to our little church. That was the first level of strong energy that the church began to have. Before long, we had students from all over the city coming to the church. The church began to grow at such a rapid pace in that first several years that we were packed in the sanctuary. Chairs under the aisle. We went to a second service. That didn't relieve it. We created an overflow downstairs. That didn't relieve it. And there were no one in the neighborhood owned cars. So on Sabbath morning, our cars were in all 4 quadrants all over the place. We didn't have to worry about our cars being stolen because Baltimore does have a high rate of car theft in the city. It was the drug dealers that looked out for our cars. I made a deal with them. I said, guys, I don't want you selling drugs, but just don't sell them in front of the church. And they got very friendly with us on Sabbath morning. And on Wednesday, they would watch our cars. So I stopped calling them drug dealers. I started calling them pharmaceutical reps because it was a much better nomenclature to call them. It got to the point of where it got ridiculous. While I was in that little church, we grew so fast, they gave me an associate pastor. I went to the conference president and said, this growth is phenomenal. To keep it, I need to have extra staff. Because I had read at certain levels, you would continue the growth if you have another person with you. They gave me Alex Royce. Alex is down in South Florida now, my first associate. And Alex began, before he left the seminary, he was about almost a year before he can join us. So every few weekends, he and Shannon would drive in just to be with us. He saw the journey as it evolved. This is when, and I'll take another 2 minutes and finish this off.
Yeah.
This is when I began early on to go out on a vision casting retreat each year, a vision preparation retreat.
Right.
First of all, the first year, it was just me that went out there. And for 3 or 4 days, just asking God, how do you want me to leave this church? Because I don't want to jack this up. And sure enough, God began to download into me where to take the congregation. We came back and worked that plan that year. Then the second year, Alex was on board. We went out and God began to give us some things that was amazing. I won't go into all of those details, but the church began to explode even more. We knew then that we needed to find another place to go. But what God was doing parallel in that he taught me about the power of prayer meeting through a visit that I made to the Brooklyn Tabernacle Church. That prayer meeting must be the main thing in a congregation, at least in that context. I went up there, learned that, came back and said our prayer meeting will never be the same because we're averaging between 7 to 15 people in prayer meeting. And by the way, for most Adventist churches around the world, they average between 7 and 15 people. Over time, without wanting to details, our church ended up having as many as 400 to 500 bodies in the seats on Wednesday night for prayer meeting. Now, the thing about it is that the average age of our prayer meeting was between 27 to 30 years old. We had young execs bringing their other friends to our prayer meetings because the thing we discovered is that in a prayer meeting where God is answering prayer, it has its own calling card that folk want to be there. Right. We baptized more people at a prayer meeting than any of the service in the church. It was ridiculous at the power of what was happening in that prayer meeting. And still today, those who lived through that experience talk about the central thing that drove that church. It was prayer. It was not pulling all the techniques, even though we use those, it was prayer. We eventually bought a new building. It was an old school that we bought. There was the old Chesapeake Conference a school that we bought. They had done the white flight and I left the church and I left the school. It was in total disrepair, ugly. I didn't even know it existed, but one of the white pastors told me about it. I took my little son, Andy, and we drove to the campus that same Friday, that same Thursday. We found out about it, and I drove on the lot. The lot was tore up. It was all boarded up, terrible looking. And when I drove up there, I got out the car and walked around, and the Lord said to me, "This is it."
There he is again.
He says, "This is it." And that same Sabbath, we had chartered several buses to put our people on to drive around after church, looking at various church buildings and properties. We already had a itinerary of what we would visit. Mm-hmm. But on that Sabbath, as a folk, there's one more place at the end that I want you to see. We were on our buses and cars, we're driving around, finally came up on that property. Alex was there and Shannon was there. And I said, "God, I'm not going to try to sell this. Yeah. If you spoke to me, then you would sell it to him." Right. The people got out and they were just quiet. We couldn't get inside the building. They were just walking around all sides, looking at it. And Alex and I were standing off to the side. Mm-hmm. And we said, "Look at God. We're not going to touch this. We'll see." And we brought the folk in a huge circle after it was all over. And I said, "So what do you think?" And it was quiet initially. Then folks said, "Pastor, this is it. This is it." And we couldn't believe it, that there was such a cohesion on that. Well, it was going to cost money to do this. We were already in a capital campaign. And we were trying to raise $500,000. And we brought all our leaders into this campaign on the session where our leaders were going to commit at a retreat place we took them off to. This is part of the capital campaign. And I thought that I would get about 100,000 out of our leaders that evening and their commitments. It was a wonderful evening. We ended up that evening having commitments of over $300,000. Just out of our leaders alone. Each of them committed to give at least $15,000. Brenda and I made a commitment that evening. My wife almost left me that evening. Mm-hmm. I made a commitment of $25,000 on that evening to be given over a 3-year period. Well, let me just fast forward. On our all giving Sabbath, we brought everyone in to make commitments. We needed to have commitments of at least $500,000. We already had 307,000 the leaders, wasn't far to go, but we ended up having commitments on that Sabbath, total with leaders and everybody, over $700,000 from that little church. We couldn't believe it. The question was, can they do it? Well, they did it, because instead of raising $700,000, we ended up raising over $1 million in cash. These young adults ended up not getting cars, ended up selling things. And that's the thing I discovered about young adults. Once they are engaged, they're passionate, they would take it all the way. And they gave this money in this 3-year period. So as we were looking to try to buy this building, we went up against New Summits Baptist Church. New Summits is Walter Scott Thomas, which is the largest Baptist church in Baltimore. Thomas also wanted the property to start a school. He just built a brand new facility up the street, and this was the consummate David going against Goliath.
Wow.
So we decided to make a bid of $900,000. I had been talking to Chesapeake Conference all along, and what I discovered about some of our cousins is that I don't care how well we know you, it's about the money.
Yeah.
And so on that day, when we were all to submit bids, several churches were to submit bids and organizations. I got there first, and walked in the Chesapeake Conference. They wouldn't let me pass the front desk. They said, just leave your bid and leave. I dropped my bid off. I got in the car and just sat to see who else was going to show up. And I'm praying, said, God, don't let anyone show up. Don't let anybody show up, God. And finally, I left. And at the end of the day, they called back and says, well, no one else showed up. Your bid was the only bid, but we want more money. I said, oh my God. Well, the church was used to praying, and we decided to raise our bid to $1 million. That means we need $100,000 in a matter of days. I called a special prayer meeting on a Thursday night. The church was full, and people began to go in and call on God. A miracle arrived at a place of where they understood the value of everyone on some points praying out loud at the same time.
Yeah.
It was the sound of prayer in that building that night was just overwhelming. I mean, and after that evening, I told my wife, I said, God's going to answer this prayer. He cannot not answer what we just experienced here that evening. And sure enough, within days, the money was there. So we bought the building. We bought it for $1 million. We had to borrow another $1 million in order to get it fixed up. When I walked into it by myself for the first time, I stood in the middle of the floor and I said, Lord, this is how it should look. And we wanted 2 giant screens down front, what are open. Everything that you see in that building right now is what God showed me how it should look. Wow. I bought Donnell Josiah I bought a few pastor friends by to pray, and I told them how it was going to look. And today it looks exactly as it is. Wow. So when we left our old building, we were averaging about, in that little building, about 375 on Sabbath morning. So when I got the Miracle, we had a little over 100 on Sabbath morning in the seats. When I left Miracle, we had over 700 people on Sabbath morning in the pews, in those chairs on Sabbath morning. The church went from a tithe at the beginning of that 12 years, and I say that 12 and a half years,
12 years,
a little over $100,000 to we were over $1 million in tithe. We came in there, we were at the bottom of the tithe in Allegheny East Conference. When we left, we were number 6 in the conference in tithe. It became the fastest growing church in North America division. We were just getting interviewed all the time as to what happened. And I was trying to tell people it was the praying that drove it. They said, yeah, we get that. But what did you really do?
Yeah.
It was there that we started the Innovative Impact Leadership Conference, and the rest is history from there.
Right.
Okay, Doc, listening to your story and watching, your energy in telling the story is amazing. And the top question for me is how different is it? Because you didn't go in thinking this is wonderful, this is great. God had to tell you, no, you're gonna stay here. But so you didn't go in loving it, but how different is it going into a Miracle Temple and being there through the growth and watching the whole process, and then going into another church like Berean, where it's already at a certain level, and they're not rat droppings anywhere. And so how different is it for you being like Phil Jackson going into something where you already got Michael Jordan, where you already got Kobe Bryant, and how different is it starting from the bottom and working your way up versus starting with something that's already established?
Wow, what an insightful question. Powerful question. First of all, it was the quickest 12 years in my life.
Yeah.
It was nonstop. And growing it from the beginning organically was powerful. It was engaging all the way. Praise God. Coming into Berean, as you mentioned, it was already established. And with established churches, there is nothing new under the sun. At least they think there's nothing new under the sun. And the navigate is going to be a lot more difficult. Whereas once we kicked in with Miracle, I'm able to move in feet. Coming to an established church, there's a whole different navigate where sometimes you feel like you're moving in inches on some things. And so the difference was great. Some of the innovations that I had been known for and to do, it was a little more challenging there because you're not, and plus I'm dealing with a much older established congregation. With young adults, they like the flexibility organically. Berean, you got to sell multiple constituencies because it's an established congregation. It has the economies of scale is much larger. The whole Berean is a machine in itself. So you're coming into something where the wheels have been grinding not for 15 years like Miracle Temple, they've been grinding for almost 100 years at that point. And so that's where you kick into what is called situational leadership. The situation will dictate how you not you don't come in and say, I'm going to superimpose. But I had to learn that because one of the reasons I left the presidency is that I wanted to come back and pastor. And I think as I sat in the presidency, I began to yearn for the days to be back in the frontline church. And I came back out of that drive, but I walked back into a context that was not going to give that same flexibility, but yet it had equally high potential. The thing was trying to find the secret sauce in order to get that moving. Where you're used to driving a race car, this was now an RV.
Yeah, wow. Gee.
Both nice cars.
Yeah.
A race car is nice. Bentley's nice too.
Yeah. But now that so for Pastor Russell, we asked Bird this, and I want to ask Pastor Russell this. Then I want to get into the North Group. Doc, you had a strong rise to the top. You had a strong rise. You were president. You went to Berean. We asked other pastors this. I want to ask you this. How did you deal with the flesh side of ministry in terms of the competition, the jealousy, the preconceived notions? What did you learn through that side of ministry? Just talk briefly about that. How did you manage that?
Well, I think all of us at times struggle with the scoreboard syndrome. And that is watching the scoreboard. Who's winning and who's on top. It's endemic to ministry. And how I dealt with it was that when I first came in, I thought I was just jamming up. Stuff I would have, I had no frame of reference. So anything that happened that was not positive, I thought I was just cracking up in ministry. I would go to workers' meeting and all the pastors would talk about their successes. They seemed to all be perfect and what they were doing. So I said, this is only me. I'm the weakest guy in the whole conference. I said, they're not going to keep me until I discover that preachers lie or they are selective in what they share.
Yeah.
Let's use that one. They are selective in what they share. Right. And they're only going to share the good stories. And so it dawned on me early on is that everyone has great days in ministry. Everyone has struggling days. Well, what had to really to break me was that early on in ministry, in my first 3 years in ministry, each year in Allegheny West Conference, they selected a pastor of the year. It was usually pastors from larger churches. But as I told you early on, God gave me a high degree of what could be perceived as success. I now have a different definition for success. But in terms of metrics, I was doing quite well. And I ended up early on getting pastor of the year. And I thought the folk would celebrate that. Because I celebrate everybody else. But that was no celebration at all. It was almost that a target was being painted at that point. Wow. Because folk could not share in the success of another. So you got things like you think you're all that, you think you're doing, and that's when God began the process of emancipation from people's opinions. And understanding is that if I allow myself to be seduced into that mentality, I would never soar. at all. And so God had to get me free early, that I recognized that, what did Jake say? Favor ain't fair.
Yeah.
And let me accept the favor, let me do my thing and go ahead.
Right.
But myself to turn around and to celebrate others. And I know with UG and certainly with Austin, is that Austin got early success early on from day one. And yet I saw him do a much better job than I did of being able to put that in perspective early and not to downplay who he was, but to go ahead and do it. And you're doing the same thing, G. So yes, God had to break me early, but he broke me out of the pain of the feedback I was getting when all I was trying to do was my best.
Yeah. So Doc, you've pastored small churches, large churches. You've been the leader of a conference. You have led some of the greatest associate pastors to ever be associates, and you've trained some fantastic pastors. You've been at Berean about over 6 years. You school, outreach building, young adult ministry, youth ministry, but then God called you to start the North Group. Talk to us about transitioning. Talk to us about being at the top of your game in one field and now jumping into another. Talk about that.
Well, I've known for the last 25 years that eventually God will release me to do this. It was always on the drawing board. I just didn't know when, where, or how. And just a very quick backdrop. 2 years before I made the move, I was in a hotel up in Philadelphia ministering. And I was in a hotel that Monday morning, and I was having worship, and God came into the room and was very clear. He says, the time is now. And I had to second guess, God, are you speaking to me? He took me to the word in Genesis chapter 12. And Genesis chapter 12 is where God tells Moses and Sarah, Abraham and Sarah, to get up and leave everything they knew, all their comfort zone, all their support mechanism, everything, to get up and start walking. And God did not tell them where they were going. He said, just start walking. I'll tell you when you get there. And so I'm saying, God, well, second of all, God, I'm now in my 50s. This is a challenging time to make this turn right now. Mm-hmm. And then the Lord said, keep reading. And I kept reading 2 verses down, and it says, and when God called Abraham, he was 75 years old. And God, I said, end of story at that point. I called my father in ministry, who I met with a few days later, or took the train down to DC, met with Barry Black, went into his office, and I said, Barry, this is what I believe God has called me to do, but I'm not sure if I can pull this. He said, Fred, let me tell you something. He says, 37 years ago, when I was sitting in Durham, North Carolina, and he was my wife's pastor, he says, God called me to go into chaplaincy ministry. He says, I went to all the brethren, senior brethren, trying to get encouragement. All of them discouraged me. They said, you would never preach in an Adventist church again. You should not do this. You're going to ruin your career. My former member, Elder Woodfork, was trying to keep him, offered him youth director in order just to stay. But he said, I felt so deeply moved by God. This is what he wanted me to do, and I had to move at it then. He said, Freddie, if I did not do what God was impressing me to do right then and there, despite no encouragement, he says, today we will not have had an Adventist chief of naval chaplains. Neither will today we have an Adventist who is sitting as the longest serving chaplain of the United States Senate. He turned to me in those sacred sanctums in his office. We're sitting in those wing chairs. He turns to me and said, Freddie, you got to go do this. And he laid hands on me and prayed over me. But it took me 2 years to act, because it's difficult to walk away from a paycheck. It really is. Right. They were already, when I ran it by people, they already thought I was leaving my calling by God. And I was saying to them, no, this is an extension of ministry. I'm trying to minister to leaders. Right. But it took me 2 years to act. And how the act came about was that I was in worship one morning, and the Lord said to me, he says, you're not waiting on me. I'm waiting on you. And within 2 days, I made an appointment with the president of the conference of the Winston, went to his office and said, on the first Sabbath of May, 2018, that's my last Sabbath, and here's what I will be doing. I went outside, got in my car, sat outside the conference hall and said, what did you just do? what were you thinking? And I had already talked to my wife early on, and she gave me her blessing. I said, Brenda, we're going after one paycheck before I can build anything with this. And so after the first Sabbath of May, 2018, when I was out there, and I said, God, I need your favor. And it's been a journey. And I will say it this way. The Lord gave me so much favor of where over the last year and a half, he has taken me around the world. I've been in places and corporations and carrying the Lordship of Jesus Christ in there with me, of training leaders on a corporate level for healthcare, everything else. And there are days that I sit back and pinch myself that I remember, and I was talking to Whitley Phipps last night, and we were both sharing, and that everything I've ever asked God to do in ministry and life, he's permitted it. And God has taken it farther than I can ever believe. Financially, he's taken care of things super well. And so in this present environment, I've had to transfer to a virtual environment because all the appointments around were being shut down. I had to make a deep investment in that. And so the Lord has set me up well where I do my first virtual major training in another week or so. And so everything I've asked God to do with that, he's done it. But here's the bigger thing: the witness, the people that have decided to talk about life. Am I able to introduce Christ into that? Has been spectacular, because now I'm talking to people who would have never walked inside my church. And he has just opened those doors. And so right now, I just got a major contract with a major organization. It was fun a few days ago to go on their website and to see that I've been teaching major leaders. Yeah. It says, in partnership with the True North Leadership Group. Wow. I said, oh my God, look what you have done with all of this. And so the Lord, I wanted to keep the best of both worlds. So every Sabbath, somewhere in the world, I'm preaching. I do a lot with the GC, the North American Division, with unions and local conferences and churches. And so he has kept me firmly established within the church. Okay. And I was nervous about the church, because once you step away, they start saying, so you got an independent ministry. I said, no, I have a company that I own, but the church has tapped into what I'm doing. And I'm so grateful to God, because I was worried about that. But God has allowed me to be embraced more than I can ask, think, or even imagine.
Doc, this leads me to the question, because when you were talking, I immediately thought pastoral leadership, but you're not just teaching pastoral leadership, you're teaching leadership. And so you're not just in the Christian realm. And my question is, being a staunch Christian as you are, carrying it, like wearing it as a cape and a moniker on your chest, how do you Christian in a secular environment?
Yeah. Well, I don't wear it on my shirt. It very much, it comes through in my life, though. Mm-hmm. So when I'm standing before corporate execs, literally corporate execs, there is something that comes across in how you speak about things. I don't talk about God overtly. I don't use spiritual nomenclature and language. Yeah. I'm also dropping values throughout. And here are the typical comments. I can set my clock by them. Someone during the middle of the day, someone's will come up to me and whisper to the side, hey, Freddie, you're Christian? I said, I am. We could tell. At the end of every leadership thing in the secular environment, this is the comments. You know, I've sat through many leadership trainings before, but for some reason, I can't put my finger on it. This was better than anything. And all I'm doing basically is teaching biblical leadership without telling them where I got it from. that is it right there. Yeah. I've gotten training in many modalities. Yeah. I'm still communicating God out there, and I'm so grateful to what God is doing with this.
So, you know, we're definitely just it's awesome to see that you're in that field, that you're doing that. And as I said before, you train leaders and you've trained pastors all over the world. You're still doing it now. One of the questions that we always want to ask, especially for preachers and leaders, what do you see among young pastors and church leaders now that they're doing right? And what are some things that you think that we can do a better job of?
Wow, that's a great question, Austin. Great question. Let me start with right, and then I'm going to say things that there's an opportunity to grow with. That's that terminology. What's right is that there is a boldness today that has been exemplified in young pastors I've never seen before. They're not fearful. They're pushing the envelope. They are more than ever in our denomination. I see young pastors speaking to the culture. They are very much connected to the culture. The culture is not controlling them, but they're connected to the culture where they're able to speak at a level of relevancy that I've never seen before. There is a holy agitation that I see, is that we are not going to say business as usual. You guys did business as usual, but we're not. We're going to be respectful. We're gonna be submissive. But you need to understand is that we're going to change our world, and we're not going to be controlled by how we've always done it. I love that that I'm seeing as a cohort this younger group is doing right now. Where the challenges can become is the ability to not just talk to each other, but to talk to others who have taken the journey as well. There is something I can learn from those who took in the journey. And there's something about understanding why it was done a certain way.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to throw it out with the bathwater. Let me understand why, then let me pivot from there. Where is that? So let me change what needs to be changed, and let me embrace what needs to be embraced. Because there's something about, as a leader, the ability to be progressive without being radical, without being militant. Right. Militant in terms of the gospel, but not militant in terms of just destroying it all. And the thing is, I think the challenge becomes, it's not a problem, it's a challenge of saying, how do I celebrate what has happened in the past, even as I see what has to happen and going into the future, and embracing both for clarity as to where it needs to pivot strong for the future.
I love that. I love that. I love that.
Yeah, that's a good word. That's a good word. I think we all can take that. We appreciate you so much, Doc. I had 12,000 other questions, but we understand that you're busy. So just the one quickie, if I can slip this one in.
Yeah.
How is it, because you've been through so many different levels? You talked about having a secretary and y'all in the same room, and she answered the phone and put it on hold and gave it to you. So, okay. So you went from that to now the North Group. You've been through all levels. You've had different levels you've had associates and you've not had associates. You've had volunteers and you've had people that been getting paid. How do you lead throughout the different various variations of people that are working with you, people that are getting paid, people that are not getting paid?
Right.
Well, I want to, great question. I want to use this term I used earlier, and then I just got certified in, and I could talk about it.
Yeah.
Maybe marketing, I don't know. But I want to talk about, again, situational leadership. The context and the person determines how you're going to lead them.
Right.
That development level determines what leadership style you're going to apply. Let me try that again. Their development level determines how you're going to lead them.
Yeah.
And where they serve that in the organization also determines how you're going to lead them. So if I do a one size fits all, I'm going to end up in trouble. But if I get very specific in terms of my leadership, thinking through them as people, not as one giant project, they're going to lead everybody a little differently, because I'm always leading towards their development.
Oh, wow.
Not towards what I'm trying to get done.
Wow.
Towards their development. And when they develop in it and become skillful, then the whole organization gets the benefit from that.
I love that. I love that.
Got you.
I love that. Doc, man, once again, we say thank you. But listen, for those who are listening, I need leadership training in my organization. I want Pastor Russell, the North Group, to come to my church. I need some personal leadership. Doc, how can we reach you? What's the best way to get in contact? What's the website? Tell us how we can get in touch with your organization today.
Well, my company does 5 things, and I answer that question. We do leadership development. We build cohesive, high-performing teams. I do executive leadership coaching, strategy facilitation, and internal conflict communication. On the personal side, where's most of my clients, senior execs in organizations, I also have a base of pastoral clients as well in the area of leadership coaching. That's number one. And if a person wants me to come in to work with a leadership team in their church, the managers give me a call at 443-257-2317 or the website, thenorthgroup.org. Thenorthgroup.org. That's how they would do it.
All right. Well, we thank you again for coming, and just everyone listen. You've been listening to I'm drawing a blank. Doc, we're gonna have to edit this.
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead.
You've been listening to again, what's the name of our podcast, Doc? I am totally blank right now.
You were blank completely?
When you ask me to be professional, dude, that's what happens. I'm supposed to do a professional skill, dude. I'm usually just talking.
Yeah. Okay, so
you do both. Come on, man.
Come on, man. We need you to come on again.
High expectations.
Come on, man.
Doc,
Hey, Doc,
all right.
This is what we need leadership right here. You know what? I should keep this in the podcast. I really should. No. Okay, but Kagia,
all right. I got you. I got you.
The Academy podcast. All right.
3,
All right.
3, 2, 1. You've been listening to the Academy Podcast with Austin and G. With our special guest today, Dr. Fredrick Russell. We're so glad that you came. We hope you learned something and had a good time while you were doing it. We look forward to seeing you again. You can catch this on YouTube. You can catch it on Facebook, or you can listen to it on Spotify or iTunes. Hope to see you soon.
All right, everyone. Take care. Pastor Russell, thanks again, man.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
All right, Doc.
You've been listening to the Academy Podcast with Austin and G. Hit the subscribe button and come again. You can find us on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and of course, Facebook. Oh yeah, and if you know someone who could use the information you just gained, take a minute to share. Much love from the AP.